Hi everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion today. This experts panel is going to be about terminology management, and it's brought to you by Wordbee and hosted by my colleague Brahim Ayoun and myself, Tanya Faulkner. For today's event, we have prepared something special for you, because we will not only give you a 60-minute deep dive into terminology management with our experts, but right after, you will also get a demonstration of Wordbee's brand new terminology management tool by our colleague Sarah Mendes. If you have any questions during the panel, you can write them in on the right-hand side of your screen in the chat box, and we will try to answer them as we go, or at latest at the end of our discussion.
We are also very excited to welcome three experts here with us today, so namely Isabella Massardo, Gabriele, Sauberer, and Detlef Reineke. And would like to invite you to take a moment to maybe introduce yourselves. So who's first?
Oh. Isabella, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Gabriele. Okay, so I'll start. I'm a translator, a terminologist, and a trainer. And I've been working in the translation industry since 1991. And I am ECQ 8 Terminology Manager certified by the TermNet Institute, where Gabriele teaches.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Isa.
Yeah. Thank you, Isabella. I'm Gabriele Sauberer. I'm head of the TermNet Group, which are three organizations. The International Network for Terminology, it's a non-profit organization, but we also have a limited company, TermNet Business GmbH, and also an affiliate in Canada, TermNet Americas. So I'm excited to be here. And I launched 10 years ago, we launched this European Certificate for Terminology Professionals with ECQA, the European Certification and Qualification Association. We have more than 400 certified people all over the world. And I'm very proud that Isabella is joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, my name is Detlef Reineke. I'm professor at the Faculty for Translation and Interpreting at the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria here on the Canary Islands. My background is a translation background. I studied technical translation a long time ago at the University of Hildesheim in Germany. My teaching is focused basically on terminology and translation technologies. And besides, I'm also active in international and national standardization in ISO and TC 37SC3, which deals with management of terminology resources. And currently I'm leading a project, a standards project, which is number 26162, which deals with design of terminology databases and terminology management systems. And besides, I do a lot of other things, but maybe we can talk about it later.
Thank you so much for introductions and welcome on the panel. We're glad that you were available to join us today and are happy to have you.
Thank you.
So let's dive on in. Before we go into the nitty-gritty, we actually thought, since this is a terminology panel, we want to talk about some terms and define some terms that are going to be relevant throughout our discussion. The terms that we want to talk about are term mining, data modeling, data engineering, and labeling.
Wow.
And maybe you just all, take a pick and provide our listeners with a definition of your favorite term. Gabriele, you want to start?
No, I don't start. I have my experts for that, I'm neither a translator's background nor a terminologist. I'm selling terminology mainly, So you picked the right ones, but I'm very glad that you didn't pick terminology itself, because this term is the most trickiest you can imagine. So please, Detlef, Isabella, you are the experts. Go ahead with text mining would be something for Detlef, huh? Prof Reineke, tell us, text mining.
Well, I would like to start out maybe with data modeling, because
even more your subject, exactly.
Data modeling, goes to the heart of terminology data management, really. because if you do not have notions, data management notions, data modeling notions, it's very hard to set up good quality terminology databases. So my first statement.
Yeah, but the definition, my dear, data modeling, like in your standards, data modeling, of, yeah, go
well,
ahead.
it deals with how to organize data categories within a database.
Okay.
So this would be a short.
So would you say, Detlef, that it's all about how these terms are structured and all of the properties around them?
Well, terms are not really structured in a term base. What you have in a term base or in every database is that you have, on the one hand, you have, let's say, classes of data fields, which we call data categories, like, for example, definition or source or term. And on the other hand, you have data elements, and terms are data elements really. And you need to organize these data categories or the data fields and the data elements in a way that they comply with terminology theory. So basically, we could say data modeling deals with how to structure your terminological entry, the concept entry.
And how would that differ from data engineering?
Well, data engineering is a more broader approach to, well, data modeling would just be a part of data engineering. Because there are more issues, more technical issues too, in data engineering than in data modeling.
Okay, thank you. Isabella, do you want to take a go at term mining?
Sure. So actually, I'm tempted to ask Siri, but I won't do that.
Go away, Isabella.
Well, it seems that's what everybody does these days. So turn to artificial intelligence. So I'm going to say that term mining is actually extracting information from a corpus, selecting or extracting terms, reference terms from a corpus. And that's something that sounds really complicated, but it's something that translators do every day. And they have to do it very quickly because, of course, they work with deadlines, very short deadlines. So we translators, I think we're kind of the Speedy Gonzales of term mining. Finding the right corpora, extracting the right terms, validating them, go back to the client with the terms, have them validated, come back to your text and work on. That's something that we do almost automatically. So term mining sounds like a big word for us translators, but it's actually daily practice.
Very true.
Perfect, thank you. All right, I think that sets us up for a good conversation here. So our first real question would then be, are there any misconceptions about what terminology management is or how it's perceived? What is your experience?
Shall I start with the bigger picture? In principle, we still face the complete ignorance of people not from the translation sector or from language, let's say the language specialists. They know, of course, increasingly engineers and at least in the software business start to understand because they get stuck. They really feel already the pain. But usually, let's say 80%. I'm very optimistic usually, but in this case, I think worldwide 80%, if not more, of people, even in large corporations, are just completely ignorant of the existence of language management, that you have to manage your own corporate language, first before you can send something out to be translated. And this, the notion of quality through terminology, as we put it, that this is really that a correct and consistent terminology is a key quality issue, in each and every profession and science. This is still ignored, and just not because people are so stupid, or they don't do it on purpose. It's just not on their radar. It's not on the radar of management teams. It pops up when it already really hurts, and these cases are getting more numerous. 30 years ago, a TermNet was founded. My organization, International Network for Terminology, was founded to create a market for terminology products and services. Which meant that there was actually nothing. Trados was a tiny EU project, and the result of an EU project, and so on. And now look at us. There is an industry. There is a language industry. There is even a terminology industry. And this is good news, of course. But 30 years, and it will will take us another 30 years to really to have more understanding, to still we need to raise awareness of the importance of terminology management. So there is still a lot of things to do, and sometimes it's really a bit scary, how low the level of awareness, even in product liability, still is when it comes to terminology management. So that would be my statement. Still a lot of ignorance, still a lot of things to be communicated.
Mm-hmm.
But if I may add, it's also the fact that I'm referring to the translation industry because that's the one that I know best. And in the translation industry, there's still this idea that terminology happens during the translation workflow, and it's something
Yes.
that's only and exclusively bilingual work.
Yes.
It's not. We should start talking about terminology also as monolingual terminology. Start before even content is produced. Or
exactly.
I think that's probably the biggest misconception for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very true. I couldn't agree more with you, Isabella. Yeah.
Thank you.
But there's some hope at the horizon.
Absolutely.
Sure.
I think there was some. I think there is some hope, and I saw it, for example, when around 2014, many LSPs started to introduce machine translation, statistical machine translation, and everybody discovered again controlled languages. And everybody wanted to create an enterprise control. Well, not everybody, but some companies decided to start again with enterprise control languages. And of course, when you start creating your own enterprise control languages, you need terminology. You need to make sure that you have one term, one concept, one term, and et cetera, et cetera. So there was kind of, it's when it started, at least from what I saw, when it started to get better and terminology became again a little bit more popular. So yes, I agree with that.
Sure.
There's hope.
For all of these organizations, corporations who have these misconceptions, some of them are quite common, we understand it. So how do you manage to kind of educate them, especially when you feel that you absolutely need from scratch? Because I'm guessing that in certain occasions they would come to you and say, okay, we understand that we have some gaps and quality is being impacted, but where do we start? And first, and maybe what are the benefits of it?
Detlef.
Maybe you allow me to go back a little bit, because when I made the statement that there is hope at the horizon, I wanted to add something or develop the idea. I'm in ISO. We are also dealing with artificial intelligence and industrial data. And we could take the big picture of big data, for example. And you always come to the point that for all these applications, you need good quality data and even terminology. And to make this system function, to make the system works. Actually, in ISO, terminologists are helping out other subcommittees to set up so-called dictionaries, data dictionaries, which are multilingual data dictionaries that are used in artificial intelligence systems and in industrial product data. So for that reason, I wanted to say that there is horizon, because we do not have to educate these people. They see the need for terminology expertise. So more and more applications are using data, Internet of Things, smart cities, e-governance, and you always need or have a terminology component in these systems.
I actually completely stopped preaching about the importance of terminology. 20 years ago, I did. That's how I started. I went to a lot of conferences and fairs, and and really tried to convince people about the importance of terminology. There is no use doing that. Now, people definitely approach us, because they already feel the pain. I think this is really the best prerequisite to have a problem, to get into troubles, and they do. It's natural. You can't avoid when you grow, even a smaller company. When you then grow, you can't avoid messing around with all these inconsistency, and it costs a lot of resources, your time, your money to cope with all these mirror errors, to correct things over and over again, to don't have a source of truth, meaning a terminology database, and so on. So educating is fine, but when already there is that basic understanding of, hey, we have to do something with our data, with our our own language, our monolingual terminology, as Isabella put it. So then it's actually way more efficient and effective to do consultancy with organizations. So it's no use trying to convince people who are not at that level yet. You need to feel the pain, you need to have a motivation why to start with terminology management, because it is very time consuming, it is costly, etc. So you need to be convinced already that it's worth doing, that you just have to cope with the issues you have.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very difficult to make people understand, to make terminology translate into money, because that's basically what you have to do. And I understand you might want to give up, but because the effect of terminology is not something that it's short term. You see it in the long term. You need to start, and there's going to be a lot of pain, just like Gabriella said. Gabriella, sorry, I'm pronouncing it the Italian way again.
No, you should. It sounds way nicer.
Okay, thank you. So yes, I agree, but sometimes it is necessary. Yeah.
Apart from,
we're not magicians, so we can translate terminology into money immediately. So
even if you say that there's just no point into trying to convince people, and there's the obvious aspects of benefits like saving time and money in the long term. Obviously, it takes time. What other major benefits do you see with terminology management?
How much time do we have?
let's focus on the major ones.
Clearer communication, better translation, better translation quality, better turnaround, better time to market in your translation workflow. I'm just talking about the translation, of course. Less customer complaints if your technical or in general your documentation is clear. I don't know, do you guys want to add something maybe?
Detlef, go ahead.
Well,
the benefits of terminology.
Maybe my turn is.
You get a job. You have a professorship. That's the first one.
Well, let me explain that professor is ambiguous in English, because they do not reflect the situation here in Spain, because in Spain, an instructor is also called professor.
Ah, okay.
And I'm something in between a German professor and a instructor. So,
Okay, very good.
well, I thought that maybe my.
So what
my
are the benefits? Because I can also, like Isabella,
part,
it's my job to promote and market terminology management. So I could endlessly point
I'm more
out.
on the technical side of terminology management. I'm more involved in things like data exchange, programming. So I'm not a business guy, let's say.
Yeah.
And maybe
You know,
I.
yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, Gabriele.
No,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
So
No.
if we talk about TVX and programming skills for terminologists, I have to say something more.
You know, we do a lot of consultancy with large corporations, and usually it's me to kickstart the project. I'm good in pioneering. It's exciting. It's always new, and it's so nice for me because you can kind of audit. You're doing assessments. You're just creating a nice atmosphere and then asking people how they are involved in terminology creation, you know, usage, the level of usage, yeah, and what are the challenges they are facing, and what they think how the company or organization could overcome it, you know. And actually, my job is really the best one because I just I'm just asking, and then I'm taking notes because the whole wisdom is already in the organization. People know much better than external consultants and external terminology experts what is the problem and what could be the solution, you know. And from my point of view, the most and major benefit is less frustration in an organization. It's more fun. It's not only the save time and resources. That's true. That's for our rational thinking, you know. But if you dive deeper into the life of an organization, because an organization is composed of human beings, yeah, still, and the frustration you feel there when there is all this, you know, this struggle with language. Language is very, very sensitive, and it, you know, you have to swear in your people to your language. Yeah, so we cannot underestimate also the power and the emotional importance of language. And if this is treated carelessly, if there are, as I said earlier, if all the same mistakes are popping up over and over again, and people waste their time to correct, and this uncertainty. We had a fair last year, but there was you know, all the descriptions, all the product names, yeah, it starts there at a very high level. Even their own product names and patents and stuff like that, you know, end up in a mess if they are not managed well. You know, this is all belonging to terminology, yeah, acronyms, all that stuff, all that daily stuff they deal with on a daily basis, and they get nuts. So the frustration level is huge when terminology is not managed at all. And this is what we see actually when you sort that out, when you really involve people, yeah, to sit down on a regular basis discussing new and existing terms, and which term we need to skip, you know, because it's outdated, and so on. Yeah, you get a lot of this peace of mind and real fun, more fun, more contentment, more engagement, you know, and way less frustration. People are really sick and tired.
So Gabriele, so you're proving that there is hope indeed, like Detlef was saying. But how do you clearly identify then the stakeholders who can share their insights?
Yes,
Because in a huge organization where so many people might be involved with many departments, many types of roles, Do you primarily speak to pure linguists, or to how does it work?
Thanks for the question. That's my favorite one, because it's so easy actually to identify the stakeholders. Isabella, maybe you remember that was that favorite, my favorite, very simple matrix. It's the power interest grid, we call it. It's from a standard. It's an annex of a standard, informative part of a standard about terminology policies actually. And there you have 4 boxes, it's four quadrants, patterns, and according to the power and to the importance. If somebody has a budget, and likes terminology, has an interest in terminology management or in managing language, then this is your joker. You'd actually, in one organization, you need one person who really has a say in the company, no matter from which department. Ideally it is management people, or the boss, the better, or a good colleague who has a good line to the boss. So one person who has high power and high interest in terminology management, then everything actually is fine. And then and we sit down with people when we first get an overview in an organization about terminology issues and who is involved in terminology creation. We get that first overview. Who is really interested in sorting out the terminology issues, and who has the power to support the project, to give resources, not only financial, but also human resources. And then you have the people who have less power, but still great interest in your project, and they are also your jokers, and you have to manage them. That's what the stakeholder management is all about. You have to inform them, you have to ask them for help, for their engagement, etc. So then also we sit down and put the names into this quadrant, so with who is the one. And people get excited when we start this way, because then all of a sudden they understand and see, wow, there are quite a lot of already interested stakeholders. So we can, mingle with them and join forces with them. And on the left side, you have people with high power and low interest, and with low power and low interest. But you have to have an eye on them as well, and to try, if they have high power, to get them on board, because maybe they become also your champions. You can maybe you can excite them as well, wow them with your terminology. That's very easy. We have very, very, very easy tools for stakeholder management, identification and management, but it's of course not so easy to implement it, to dare to go to other departments and ask and build up alliances. The communication is key, and it's really weird actually that language practitioners usually are not that fond of communicating, of using language to promote their case. That's also what we're really training people, how to sell terminology, how to come up with a cost and revenue, a return on investment calculations, but mainly how to sell that, how to get the buy-in from those who have the power. And this is actually 80% of the success of your terminology project. If you identify and engage them and manage well these people who are interested in terminology.
I can imagine that it might be maybe easier to get this frustration from certain parties, like if I can imagine like sales teams having to deal with some marketing materials where they feel like the wording is inconsistent from one document to another. So
yeah. Yes. And if you join forces with these people, just invite them for coffee or for lunch, yeah, and have a talk to them and ask them, how would you suggest to sort that out? You will get the best ideas, you know, they will work because they're very close to the clients, you know, they understand that we need to have a system and to organize language and terminology. They understand, and if they partner with you, you get a lot of good ideas and good arguments then how to sell it to those who have a budget, because you need resources. Of course, we gave courses and webinars about how to, you know, get resources for terminology management. That's very important.
So based on like you kind of talked a little bit now about how you get this started with the stakeholders. When we look at what is the right time of starting, you know, how to initiate a terminology management project, what does the process look like, the different stages of terminology management, can we talk a little bit about that?
Very interesting. Isabella, you know it from your stubborn clients. They refuse.
Stubborn clients. Yes, absolutely. I actually have a question for Detlef later on, if I may, but so remind me, I just wrote it down. So what was the question exactly? How do you start with terminology management in practice? Or
yeah, how to initiate it, and what does the process look like? What are the different phases?
Well, the ideal process would, for a translation process, we're talking about a translation process here, right? So the ideal moment for me would be even before the translation starts. Do the term mining, the term extraction, even before the translation starts. Have the term translated, validated, look them up in corpora, in your translation memories. You know, ideally, if you should already have a glossary or term base. But if you don't, then we'll start working with your translation memories. You'll even find that sometimes definitions are in your translation memories, or you'll find what I call the free range definitions. It's not an official term. So if you look at free range definition, you'll probably find the definition of free range, egg or chicken. By that free range definition, by that I mean you have a term, and you know, maybe between brackets or in another clause there's an explanation of that term. So that's already a good start for definition. But ideally, terminology work should start even before the translation process itself. You know, every term should be already validated by the project manager, by the client, by, I don't know, the subject matter expert, you know, the persons that you have within your workflow. It depends how many people are there, of course, and that way you'll make the translation process easier for your translators and for your reviewers, and you'll work faster and you'll work better, and so on. So if you talk about content management, sorry,
Isabella, I don't want to sound negative or anything, but I have this perception that it's a lot of work, especially if you consider that you might have, for example, for a typical translation company, having to build these term bases for their own customers. How often should they go and start creating a new term base, because they're going to work on a daily basis with on so many projects for different types of content. So
sure.
And I guess it's hard to imagine that there is this initial work before starting any type of work.
Yeah, I know, but just think of the pain that you're going to go through if you don't do that. First of all, just referring to what Gabriela said before. And, you know, I talked about an ideal situation. Of course, you won't do terminology management if you have I don't know, a text of 600 words, but, you know, we're talking about higher volumes here. And I can't imagine that language service providers don't have already some vertical glossaries, at least, to start with. And if you're really desperate, and I hope you're not, there are glossaries that you can download from the internet. Think of the Yate. You can already download it, extract term, and start from there. I know there are websites where translators and language service providers exchange terminology, exchange glossaries and translation memories. Now, I'm not going to vouch for the quality of those language data, of course, but that could also be a good start. I just saw yesterday the World Intellectual Property Organization has a new term-based beautiful. It's really
Yeah, it's
beautiful. You
excellent.
can do a concept match
Yeah.
search. It's
Yeah.
amazing to even to look at, you know. So I think that's the ideal situation. Of course, you're right, Brahim. It's difficult, and you know, time is really short. But ideally, it should be before the translation starts. So.
Okay. Is that the right moment to ask your question to Detlef?
Yes. Okay. No, I was just I was fascinated by what Detlef was talking about, data modeling and labeling and artificial intelligence, etc. And I came to terminology very late. I mean, my university degrees was a lot of grammar, translating, you know, literary translation, lots of Dostoevsky and whatever.
Sure.
So I came to terminology later because I needed to learn about terminology for my work, etc. But I'm asking Detlef, what are going to be the skills necessary for the terminologist of the future? Because you talked about, you know, big data. I mean, it's interesting because right now, from what I see when I give training on terminology management, most people are struggling with an Excel sheet.
Definitely.
Not to talk about TBX.
I think there is only.
It's very interesting, and I'd like to know.
Yeah, I think that as the terminology studies are always associated with translation studies, I think these studies are basically complete. And there's only one aspect that, in my view, is missing, and it is the data engineering aspect. Because you just mentioned it, you can download a TVX file from IATE, WIPO has something, there is something. And in most cases, it would not be necessary to create a new terminology database from scratch. You could fill your terminology database with existing terminology. But the problem is that terminologists normally do not have the skills, the knowledge to manipulate the data in order to get these data into their terminology databases so that it perfectly fits their needs. And this is my, let's say, my interest to push people who implement translation studies, terminology studies, to introduce these low-level programming skills in order to make terminologists more versatile in the sense that they can really download the data, manipulate them, and get them into their terminology database without asking non-terminologists, a programmer, for example, which wouldn't be a solution either, because non-terminologist programmers do not know nothing about terminology. So you have to give them lessons how to, and explain them how terminology works. The best would be this hybrid situation where terminologists also have some kind of programming skills. And I think this is also an interesting and attractive idea at a personal and at a societal level, because there are a lot of initiatives in Germany, in the United States, in Japan, that try to introduce these programming skills at the UNESCO ICD Level 2 education, which means children from 10 to 16 years, secondary school. And the German State Minister for Digitization goes even further, because she wants to have these contents even in primary school. So imagine what will happen to your jobs if these kids come to the market, to the labor market. So I think there is an urgent need that today's terminologists go to the courses that offer Gabriele in the Terminology Summer School and learn more about these skills, for example. And maybe I can develop this idea a little bit more, because when I say low-level programming skills, what does this mean? This means that you have knowledge in XML technologies, JSON as well. You should also have some notions or good notions in XSLT, which is an XML-based transformation language. Many people use Excel as a term-based tool, which they shouldn't, but many people do. And to get these data with good quality out of Excel and to share it with other people, you might also need some API programming knowledge, like, for example, Visual Basic for applications, in order to get your processes in good shape. So all these things could be included, let's say in master studies, for example. And there are also some initiatives. I think the University of Graz has introduced some skills in a project. I don't know what his name was. Gabriele, do you remember the name of this?
No.
This translation study. Well, there's something going on already, but as I stated, if kids are studying low-level programming today, they will be good programmers when they come to the university and the labor market. And this skill will just be considered as the other cultural skills like reading, writing, maths, and programming.
This is interesting because when Brahim and I were doing our research beforehand, and we're not terminologists, and we were already saying like, oh, this is kind of technical, and that was before we were talking about JSON and coding.
Unfortunately, the reality is not so advanced. Unfortunately, like Detlef is described. It would be wonderful. If it could be already like Detlef describes, but it's a bit lower level.
One day it will be.
Absolutely.
May I add something? Because I couldn't agree more with Detlef that definitely the basics, like coding, programming, this is an XML, all this techie stuff. This is definitely necessary and still missing. However, what I'm hammering, I really learned to hammer that into people in our summer schools and courses. Don't start with the techie stuff and the tools. You have to start with people, followed by processes, and then come in the tools. Because this is what we are actually seeing all over the place, that people start with the tools. They think that, but only if we have a decent system, a term base, a tool, then we are going to cope with our terminology and language issues, which is not the case. We learned that first you need, as we talked earlier, you need to get the buy-in from people. You have to motivate them. You have to really engage them, because otherwise, your wonderful tool and even your great integrated terminology process will be dead. They will not be used. Or, okay, the terminology guy will use the tool and nobody else. In many cases, they don't even know that there is a tool, and they wouldn't want to touch it because it's too, unfamiliar with them. So definitely, we need both. We need to train people more in communication, how to sell the value of terminology management, and also the processes. The processes are very important. I've seen so many standalone processes, of how to manage terminology. And if they are not integrated in the landscape, like with the tools, if a term base is a standalone that nobody wants to touch, and nobody wants to maintain and feed, then you get into trouble. It needs to be integrated at least with interfaces in your entire IT landscape. And the same goes for the processes. That was the great value of the dissertation of Annette Weiland. Yeah, she got the chance to work for Daimler. Yeah, and they really started with, and to have her doctoral thesis there, and they really started at a very early stage with terminology management, not even in when it came to translation, but really in the developing phase, where actually, the new terms are created and product numbers are given, etc. And then she came up with a very generic terminology process, and she called it the integrated terminology process, together, with other business processes, integrated into the landscape of quality processes. This is where we have to be, to really safeguard also not only efficiency of terminology management, but also sustainability. Yeah. So I think all these these three main fields and the related skills, people, processes, and tools, they are equally important. But the order, of starting a project, coming back to your early question, is definitely you have to start with people. If you,
So,
Yeah.
so you're talking about sustainability. How would you do? You guys have any tips as per how to assess the process was successful?
Oh, very good. But Isabella, Detlef, I don't want to speak all the time. I'm too bossy and too.
Can you
What I mean is that
Mhm.
yeah, you're going to put lots of efforts in starting creating term bases and dig into the technical aspects of it and extracting the TBX fields or whatever. You're going to implement that at different phases with content creators and maybe translators, QA people, and obviously it doesn't stop there. You will have to maintain it frequently. I'm not saying it's going to be once a year or once a project is completed each time, but how do you make sure that everyone is happy with this? I'm guessing that you have the end customer or user feedback, which is obviously
we translators say that if the client doesn't ring you back shouting, then you've done a good job. That's basically.
That's not a good motto.
That's the big test. If your phone doesn't ring or if your email doesn't explode, then the client is happy. If he calls you again with another job, then he's happy. It's something that you need to measure within a long period of time. Of course, you can set KPIs if you're really fancy, or just make sure. First of all, just make sure, as Gabriele said, that your process is really sound, that all the stakeholders are really working together. Have your subject matter experts, your in-country reviewers, etc. And of course, be patient because it takes a little bit of time. I think that's the main thing to say. And set KPIs if you want to, but not everybody likes KPIs. So moving on.
All right.
Detlef, what about you? Assessment?
Well, I think this is a very difficult question because all projects are different and you need different assessment for different projects. So it's very hard to say that there is one way to assess.
Would you maybe be able to answer this, Detlef? So translators are working, and I'm guessing that the idea is also to make sure that, to decrease the time and all of the questions and you might get from them to make the process efficient. So what would you say translators' expectations might be in terms of maybe the components of a term base? So is there any content type that is obvious and should be there each time you work with the term base? Can you think of any specific elements?
My answer would be quite the same as for the previous question because every term base is different. So It always depends on the context where you use this term base. So
I think it's very easy, actually. Sorry to to bring up a different position, because we have these standards. Yeah, and Detlef, you even mentioned this the standards for data modeling and for the term basis. So what we do at TermNet, and our clients, you know, they just want to have a sound evaluation, yeah? Because they wouldn't pay us money if the quality wouldn't be good. So we have to first assess the state of the art, you know, and then to come up to ask in all these interviews, what is the future state? Where do they want to go, and how do we measure if we are there? You know, so in these commercial projects, if you wish, you have no choice. You have to come up with KPIs, and you have to show that you know, can tick the boxes with yes, yes, yes. This is what we achieved, yeah? And actually, the standards give us a lot of help, you know, because we have, this is what the huge consortium is has agreed upon, you know, what is a quality indicator or a KPI, and you then simply, you know, tick your boxes. You compare where have you been, what was the state of the art, and what was the you know, the targeted goal, and are you there already? Yeah. Okay. And I think even with these requirements, yeah, people understand what requirements are, and in particular engineers, yeah, they live from requirements, and software engineers. Yeah, it's very easy actually to define, so to sit together with them and to define, with, as Isabella pointed out, with the other stakeholders, yeah, what would they want to see, what would make their life easier. And that's also my key message always when I start, and when it's the intermediary report and sessions, and at the end. Did that make your life easier? That's my one single KPI, if you wish. Because if I did not manage with my terminology consultancy and my processes and my tools to make the life of the organization easier, then I completely failed. If I came up with a process which is too complex and which is not integrated, and if I recommended to buy I don't know which sophisticated tool, and nobody is trained to use it, or motivated enough to use it, then I failed. You know, I think it's really, really important to have a simple way of evaluation, coming from both sides, from standards, from international quality standards, and from the clients, you know, from the various stakeholders of the terminology management. And please don't end up with 500 criteria and KPIs, but with 10, you know, the 10 common, then this is tangible, measurable, and feasible to do. I think complexity is one of the reasons why people really don't want to touch language. They understand, they know that it's everywhere, language is everywhere, and if you tackle language and terminology, you know, people are really afraid that it's then huge and overwhelming. That's why we have to keep it simple, and we have to bear in mind that the focus is on making people's life easier with terminology management.
Yeah. So I would even say, if I may, I would even say, forget about the standards and just look at the requirements of your clients. You know, sometimes it's even that. But I wanted to say something. Gabriele said, I pronounced it correctly. See this time. Gabriele said, look at the process and then go for a technology or a tool, which is absolutely true. But it's also important that you talk to your technology provider, because I can't imagine that a language service provider doesn't already have some kind of technology in place, whether a platform or a simple CAT. So collaborate with your technology providers, see whether they can help you to develop the right functionalities for you.
Definitely.
Talking about technology, Detlef, I actually want to go back to something you mentioned at the beginning, because you're leading an ISO project that, you know, talks about or deals with the design principles of the development of terminology management systems. Can you tell us a little bit more about those principles and what's the state of the art of terminology management systems, or maybe is there room for improvement? What are they lacking?
Well, I think, this ISO standard that you refer to is a kind of cookbook for terminologists to design terminology databases. So what you find there is a kind of framework, or as we call it, the terminological meta model, how every terminology database should be structured in order to provide a certain interoperability between different tools and applications on the one hand. And on the other hand, the second part of the standard provides some, let's say, principal features that every terminology management system should support. And you can also use the standard as a checklist if you want. So my term-based complies with this and that and that. My terminology management system complies with this and that. So I would say, I would just make another statement, because at the end of our discussion, to what Gabriele said, because she said that we have to make things easier. I'm not quite, I don't quite agree with this, because
you're academic. How could you agree? You're academic. You live from complexity, dear Detlef.
The question is always if we bring the mountain to Muhammad, or if we bring Muhammad to the mountain. If we make things easier and easier, where will we go from a cognitive point of view as human beings? So my way is the other way around. We should bring bring people nearer to complexity and make them understand complex scenarios instead of make it always easier.
It's complex enough. I agree with you. The world is so complex already. We cannot, move to ancient times. Yeah, but to
in ancient times, Gabriele, things were easier.
Oh yeah, of course.
Complex. So I don't know if the correct way is to step away from complexity.
You can't anyhow. I fully agree with you in this respect. We have to learn to cope with complexity, but to make the life easier, when I use that notion, I mean to avoid all the mess, because without managing your language and your terminology, you are not increasing complexity, you are just decreasing clarity, you are increasing a mess. And this is what actually people annoys a lot. And to make their life easier is to provide a source of truth, to provide valid data. The data and the database can be as complex as they have to be, yeah? But it is not complex for them. It makes their life easier because they can rely on that data, and then their life is easier because they don't have to browse and to search and to think of, oh, is this the correct version? Is this the term I can use or should use? Yeah? That is not complexity, but it's just, it's a burden, it's a pain in their neck, and this makes their life easier when we sort out these troubles, these inconsistency and all the stuff, all the mess.
Yeah. Actually,
I would like to
say one of our listeners, he has a good point, and he's agreeing with you guys. He says, I believe there's useful complexity and there's pointless mess.
Very good. Very good. Yes,
it was
definitely.
We're running out of time, but we had a question from one of our listeners, and we definitely want to answer that before we stop this panel. So he's from Sweden, and he's saying, in Sweden, we see an increase in the number of people working with terminology or closely related activities, but which have a different background. Like, for example, they are knowledge managers or demand analysts. Does this, in your view, alter the processes of terminology work? arguments used, or even the tools?
I didn't get the question. Does this, and then the sound wasn't clear. Could you repeat just I understood that there are increasing number, but the end of the question.
Does this alter the processes of terminology work?
Does this alter the processes?
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful. Very good question. Thank you. Who wants to answer? Or shall we all? Because this is what we experience a lot, in particular also software engineers, and that's really good news. I'm so proud that more and more people from all over the world from the software, they have no linguistic background, and they join us, at the advanced level of our certification trainings, not the basics, so the advanced level. And that's very important. And I don't think that it will change. It will change the way we are going to educate people, actually, because we always have very heterogeneous groups. Maybe for me it's very natural that there are different backgrounds, and that's why I think it will not change. Maybe Isabella and Detlef should answer that.
No, I don't think there is a big difference. I mean, actually, sometimes people do terminology work without even knowing it. If you think web developers and software developers, they might be busy with ontologies, taxonomies, etc., and that's already terminology work. So they just don't know. Maybe they're not aware that it is, but knowledge management, knowledge managers, or whatever the title is nowadays, that's already has a component of terminology. So no, I think the process will probably be designed based on your criteria and your requirements, but there shouldn't be something completely different.
I think the core will always be the same. What changes are applications, context.
True.
But, terminology is a long-standing and big change in the basics. So I don't think that this would alter the processes in terminology, but always depends on in which context we are working. So I think the scenarios will change, but the pure terminology processes would be quite stable in the future as well.
And would you say that it might vary depending on the industry itself, or?
Yeah, of course. What I mean is what varies is, for example, data models. Now, as you asked me in the beginning, data models change if you are working in monolingual context or in multilingual context. If you are working in product data environments, in artificial intelligence, industrial data. So this is what changes. But the core business, the core terminology business will always be the same.
But people don't want to hear. Every industry thinks it's so specific. I have to kind of balance. On the one hand, I comfort our clients, say, well, you're not alone. Yeah? Even in other industries, they managed 23 or 33 languages and translations, etc. And on the other hand, I have to kind of point out, there are some special things, but at the end of the day, the basics, as Detlef said, the basics are always the same. And to repeat it, to start the terminology project, people, processes, tools. And this is always the same in each and every industry. But of course, people want to hear that they have their company or organization is very specific, their industry is very specific. But at the end of the day, it's always the basics are always the same. And kind of very sustainable over time, obviously.
Well, guys, we're really out of time. We had a lot more questions for you. We wanted to talk more about TBX and some more process stuff of terminology management. But
we'll have a look at your tool.
Exactly, we're going to have a look at
Yes, I'm curious.
It supports.
Yes. So in the meantime, I want to thank you guys for being for joining us on our panel, and we're going to hand over to our colleague Sarah Mendes. She's the specialist in-house at Wordbee for terminology, and she's going to show you our terminology management tool within Wordbee Translator, which is our translation management system. So I'm going to mute you all, and we're going to give the stage to Sarah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thank
Pleasure.
you, everyone.
Thank you.
So, Gabriele.
So I'm taking over. Hello, everyone. All right, so you should now be able to see one Wordbee translator platform. This is the platform we're going to use for our terminology demonstration. Now, there are several things you need to know beforehand. You all have the possibility of loading up your resources of different kinds. We have terminology and translation memories. But in order to explain the full cycle of how terminology is being managed and used in Wordbee, we first need to know how we make this space a controlled space. So how do we know exactly what things are available for us and what things can we actually define for our terminology databases. Therefore, we go first to this section where we have all the information related to this terminology data sets. We have the possibility to define two different levels of properties and of data fields, as Detlef explained before. On the one hand, we have the possibility to have TBX fields, and you have a list here of the TBX fields that Wordbee supports. We are actually compliant with the last standard TBX 3.0, so the list of elements that you will find in this Excel file I already downloaded is actually contained in that standard. We also support some other fields from the legacy standards, just in case you want to migrate your resources into the system, which makes it very flexible in terms of reuse and input and output data. So this is just a small collection of about 60 elements contained in that standard. I highlighted some of them that might be actually interesting for you to start with. So the main properties you would like to attach into your term or concept entries. As you see, each of them are defined for different levels, and some of them are actually defined at the 3 levels as in the standard. Some others just are defined for one of them. Let me explain this more into detail with some examples. So coming back to our platform, we see on one side we have all these properties available that we can actually limit or restrict in the way that we also kind of craft the way users will interact with them in the system. We will propose here a system that is very close to what the CAT tool offers, but just adapted to the terminology work so that you stay in a Wordbee-like environment the whole time. The focus here for terminology, of course, is to have a controlled space in order to avoid all these manual errors and also to guide the users through the creation of entries in the database. On the lower part of the screen, you see now who actually can take part into these activities. So at the moment, we have administration rights for people who are responsible and also managing the resources. All the other people will be actually passive users who can benefit from all these entries while doing their translation work. This means that all the work that terminologists, users or administrators do in the tool can also be reflected while doing translations in the specific projects that are taking part in Wordbee Online. Now, we have also the possibility of defining additional fields. If they are not already proposed in the TBX list, you can always define specific fields in your platform that will actually allow you to include additional information in form of a picture, in form of a URL, or even just pick lists and text fields as usual. So once we review all this information, just very, very briefly, I invite you to take a look at it in your own platforms. We can now navigate to one specific resource. I actually already opened in my second tab this astronomy database that contains a collection of 60-something terms for English. Some of them have already definitions and also terms for Spanish. But here, what we actually want to show is actually how the information is structured in the system. So we got a raw now description of what Wordbee offers, but now let's make it more visible, more user-friendly. I just click on this, but in order to save us the loading time, I will just navigate to the second screen. Whenever you access one of your databases that is of type terminology, you have the possibility to enter this space. As you see, it's divided in a very logical way. It has a side on the left, which provides a list on the terms for the language you actually clicked on. It already offers a collection for those terms with their relevant status in English with the identifier next to them and with the term also highlighted. So right now I'm focusing on this particular term, but if I come to the top of the list, I'll see that the properties also update as I go. Also on the right side, as soon as you click on one of these elements, let me go back to the one I was showing because it's very rich on properties. You have an upper and a lower side. So actually, when you start navigating a database, the first thing you would like to check is how the concept is defined. What is actually the form of that concept, and then you will start looking for the representation in the different languages. So if for one concept you find all the relevant information, then you will start entering the terms for the languages for that one concept that require work. In other words, you first will need to do the research for the concept. If you find it in the database, then you are able to fill all the language information related to it. But if the concept already exists, maybe you will just need to check if the terms for your language also exist. In our case, if we were now to enter more information about galaxies, maybe it's already contained in one of the terms proposed for English. So the representations that we have already for this language. If we want to just add an additional language because we know this one is not available, we will then be adding an additional section into this entry in the database. So everything is nested, as you see. The concept will be the main level, then you will attach the languages in a lower level, and then just next to them inside the terms for all the languages. And of course, as you see, languages are not translations. Each of the languages has different representations for the concept. So this is important that when you do your research, you don't try to look up for the equivalent term or translation. You do actually the research based on the concept information. At one point, you maybe want to do some revision work where you just need to verify all the information that has been entered by the terminologist or the editors. And if you want to do this for more than one language, you are able to verify this information for more than one of the working languages in the database. You can enter the side-by-side mode that will actually allow you to compare and to actually maybe complete the terms within the concept entry. At the same time, if you just want to make sure that you are not repeating yourself, you're not entering doubles in the database, you can just show side by side the same language and add an additional entry or more properties into one of the particular forms. So now we have actually here side by side two forms of navigating this database. You see, by default, when we entered this concept, we had a short view of what the concept offers. This short view is now collapsed on the right side. We had already one field that contains here the definition. We also actually have additional fields that include the descriptions and so on. So you will be able to see the full view or a full information of this term entry when you enter the edit mode. Entering this kind of screen will show actually all the preset fields that are available at this level. This means that all these different views we see are already preset by the system so that you find the information that is most relevant to you for the database right away. If for any reason you find this will not be enough, you always have the possibility to add additional properties from the list we saw at the very beginning. So it doesn't matter if it's for a term or for a concept, you always have the possibility to navigate the full list of additional properties. They can be custom fields or TBX fields that you can attach to the working entry. And once you are done, you can just close the menus and update as in any segment from Wordbee. So you can actually do exactly the same kind of manipulation when you enter the concept level. And here we have a full view of the segment ID, the definition, examples, and so on. So you are just able to navigate the information and add maybe some more relevant properties that allow you to see what's the current status of the work. So this is how you will be able to work in a collaborative way in a controlled environment. The same way, if you now need to relate concepts within the same database or maybe within external databases, you can also make these kind of relations with specific TBX properties that are designed for that. So if now, for example, I want to link the galaxy concept into, or I don't know if I have something here for galaxy, I'll rather get star and I'll get it linked to supernova. It's kind of easier. Now this is very straightforward. So I could just edit. I find all my information related to this entry. And I can now cross-reference it to supernova. Once you do this, you are actually saving a crossed link that allows you to navigate within the resource. And it's now easier. I needed to click on save. Let me see if the information is now saved. Yes. So this way is easier for you to build bridges and to make shortcuts between the different elements which are related to each other. You can have in the full list of TBX properties very different kinds of relationships. You can have concepts which are broader or narrower, and this will help translators to get a full understanding of these terms that sometimes arise while translation work. What you want to achieve here is to speed up all this research process that sometimes it can actually be done beforehand, and so that just translators find the relevant information to make always the right choices while they are in these situations where close deadlines need to be met and where they actually don't have time to do all these side activities that translation work require. So if you have dedicated staff that can just work in this environment, everybody will be benefiting from this. Not only you will have a control space to just bring your people and focus to the same structure and the same kind of workflow and know-how. Also, the translators, which are already participating in the workflows, can have a view of all these entries. And we are actually working on further evolutions of this tool, which will make it possible for managers and administrators to define what should be the default view for each of these users. What should be the default view while working in the editor? Or what are the fields that I want to promote, not only as we saw in the previous page, the fields I want to have here listed right away, but also in which is the particular order I want to show, and if I want to make them mandatory or not, which is something we already provide with some of the fields, custom fields, which are supported or defined in Wordbee can be made mandatory, and we will extend this kind of behavior to other properties that are actually part of these data models. So I don't know if there are any questions here from our audience. As you see, this navigation is very straightforward. It's very well structured in a way that you can easily find the information if you always refer to the same geographical areas. And let me then check what's being asked in the audience.
I can tell you, yes, indeed, we have some questions, Sarah. So one of them would be, is each term base its own repository? And if so, can I search across two term bases at once that are two distinct repositories?
So the way you will navigate this term base is actually based on the way you actually navigate the term bases in Wordbee in general. All these records are limited into this particular data set here. So all the entries that are contained in this resource can be found in this list. Of course, if you then link and create external references to other databases, you will be able to access them by just clicking the links, but you will not be able to get to them through this search bar above, which allows you to just call up any of the fields that you have contained in your resources here in any of the entries. Let me see exactly what was the other question. Yes.
So the second part of the questions was, if so, can I search across two term bases, sorry, at once that are two distinct repositories?
No, so this is the one part. Every time you access this database, you access one specific database, and only clicking on the links will bring you to the other repository. In this case, this is the way it's designed. You are not able to load more than one database.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So next question is, how granular are the editing rights? Can I have permissions per language or per data category? And can one user have different editing rights per term base?
Yes, no, these access rights are defined the same way that are defined for the rest of the resources in Wordbee right now. So you have management rights that allow you to navigate and access this management space. And then if you don't have the right to have to access and edit all these properties, which are mainly TBX and custom fields, you may have the possibility to edit the custom fields with a different access right, or just edit the fields through the normal editor space that was and still is proposed to all the people who don't subscribe to this terminology module. So this makes just the task of maintaining terminology a little bit more cumbersome, because it's an editor that is most dedicated to work more like in a glossary-like environment. And this is very much deep and refined in a way that it proposes everything nested the way you should and the way you will see it also in the database. So you have a view of the concept and all the terms attached to it. And this is something that you will not achieve in the other side. Making more access rights for different kinds of activities, having terminology editors against terminology managers, or just terminology users who can access the database and export the results, is something we're also exploring with the feedback we get from our current users. And we can expect some evolutions of this tool. This we will also take into account. Of course, we want everybody to benefit from this work.
So we have lots of new questions popping up right now. So one of them is, why is Galaxy and Milky Way registered in the same record? And are they not different concepts with a hierarchical relation between them?
Yes, so in this case, if we go back to Galaxy, of course, this could also be linked into a different concept, and both concepts can actually be linked to each other. In this way, we didn't make Galaxy, I mean, the concept Galaxy, we didn't refine it that far. So we were able just to bring all the concepts together. Galaxy is just, sorry, the Milky Way galaxy is the one we live in. So it's just the relation we were talking about before about having broader or narrower concepts. In this case, this is just a particular form of a galaxy. We could actually also change and use the term time property to say here, this is actually a noun, a proper noun. And this way we can just make sure that we have the term refined and reduced to the scope that actually refers to.
We have another question for another person, so which is, how do you associate the source? Meaning in your entry there is a source, but it's not clear if it refers to the definition or the context.
Yes, so that's also part of the use you need to make and decide within your team. Currently, we have one TBX property defined in the source, and you can refer to the source field as something you consider the source of the term, where was the term found, or also the source of your definition. The list of TBX fields is not actually that refined that it allows you to separate or differentiate one to the other. If I come back to my TBX field list and I go and look for source, I can actually just filter it here too. I see how many times I have the source entry. So I see I have these two, and they are actually both available at both levels. It will be up to your team to define which is the one to use in each case. And if you find that these are not specific or straightforward enough, you can always create custom fields that make that decision explicit. Like you can have the source and between parentheses definition, source, context, source, term, and so on, and have your terminology database defined without any hesitation.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Next question. Is there any mapping feature for import-exports? And if so, could you show it?
Yes, then let us go back to the system. We will see what the import-export capabilities for the terminology databases are. If we now want to export this database, we have actually the possibility to do it in the two standards that we actually supported. This one is the latest standard, and it will provide you all the different terminology fields that you have within the concept. So you will be able to maintain that relationship between one single concept and several terms attached to it. On the other hand, the terminology one version will not allow you to do this. So you will be creating several entries in the database, each of them with one of the concepts and one of the terms. So this kind of evolution is already made explicit here, that you will get a more limited database or more entries if you choose one or the other version of the standard. But we understand that if you do this export is because you want to import the data or exchange it with another system that actually does not support version 3. For whatever activity you want to do, maybe just to perform your translations or to do some maintenance work offline, this is actually something that you will need to check cross-wide with the other tools that you are using. The same if you come to the import menu, we have the possibility to import any TBX file in a way that it just can map any of the two standards with the relevance that the TBX3 has a wider and more restricted definition of how the categories are defined, which has been also the focus of some work teams that we understand had made the standard more clear and compatible across different tools. So we encourage always to use the latest standard for compatibility reasons.
Thanks, Sarah. So next question is value the data category name for term?
Yes, so this is part of our own terminology in Wordbee that we are also improving. We are putting forward more user-friendly and also accurate terminology into our own tool, and this is part of that evolution. So we are still defining those within our company so that we can make things more straightforward for the end user too. We see that value for the term value might not be something very clear for the user in general, and we are also looking for better assessment of such fields. So you can expect some improvements in the way the layout and the different parts of this tool are displayed.
I'm just checking if I didn't miss anyone. I think there is one which is which has not been addressed yet. So is there does Wordbee support graphical representation of concept relations systems?
So if you mean that if you can attach a map or a conceptual or a relation map into your database, that's always something possible if you have it in an attachment that you can actually put available in a website, or you want to make just available in form of a screenshot. We don't have the possibility to draw these relations within the tool. So if you are able to make these outside the tool and link them through an URL or through a screenshot, that will be the way how to do this nowadays. There is no other way to have a collection of such elements in the database right now.
Good. I think we covered all questions, which is a first. That's impressive. So if we may still accept another couple of questions if you have any. So don't be shy. Feel free to post it in the chat box.
Yeah, of course, we also invite you to experience the tool yourselves. You will see that there are a lot of administrative and user fields that you can use in order to give your team the best approach to terminology work. So we are expecting also you to propose what actually are your needs to make this tool evolve. And we are always happy to get the feedback from you. If you need any help, by the way, you can just click here the question mark and you will get to the documentation where the processes are described, and you get more examples to help you through the way.
It seems we are not getting any more questions. So I think we probably wrap this up, but if anyone has some questions later on, feel free to reach out to us through our website, or even just respond to the invitation that you got from GoToWebinar for this panel. Sarah, thank you very much for demonstrating this to us. It was great, and there were a lot of questions. Thanks for all the questions to the participants.
Jess, by the way, if you have more questions, next week we will be actually in Milan doing some courses on terminology. So we would also be there if you just want to swing by and make a participation. We can just be there for you.
If anyone's in Italy or wants to go on a quick trip to Italy, Sarah will be there. And thanks again to our panelists as well. It was a great discussion. This was recorded, and you will all receive an email within 24 hours with the recording of both the panel discussion and this demonstration. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time.